Today, on the 82nd anniversary of D-Day, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth turned a speech celebrating the bravery of the Allied forces who stormed the beaches of Normandy into a critique of European immigration policies.
Sadly, today, different European beaches are stormed by different dangerous ideologies. Beaches in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, and Bulgaria, boats and men arrive. When will European capitals do something about that invasion?
Hegseth's comments come days after the Washington Post reported that the Pentagon hired a convicted January 6 rioter for a sensitive counterterrorism job, even though he later claimed he regretted taking part in the Capitol attack. Hegseth also blocked the promotions of 3 women and 2 black male Navy officers last month. It's a highly unusual move, but it appears to be part of a pattern of disproportionately targeting minority candidates for military promotion. He did the same thing to 2 women and 2 black Army officers in March, and he has intervened in the promotions of more than a dozen black and women senior officers across every branch of the military. Joining us now to discuss is Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, MS Now military analyst and retired commander of U.S. Army Europe. So, General Hertling, I want to start with your reaction to Secretary Hegseth's comments today on the D-Day anniversary. I'm sure that when you were in Europe, you went to one of those ceremonies. Can you talk about his comments about immigration and invasion of Europe, and as well as his broader posture about the war?
Yeah, Elise, it's a great question because I did have the honor to speak at the 68th anniversary back in 2012. And this ceremony every year, especially given the decreasing number of veterans from the landings and also the coming together of increasingly more European national leaders at this event, is unfathomable for its honor and dignity. Now, people and nations can have disagreements about immigration policy. But the key question in my mind is whether a D-Day commemoration, which is supposed to be honoring the veterans and talking about what occurred on this site where, you know, at Normandy Cemetery, there are almost 9,400 soldiers, sailors, airmen buried there. And whether it's appropriate to make that kind of argument while calling out select allies in the process, which Secretary Hegseth did for 4 different U.S. allies. Additionally, what I would say, and I'll get out of my analyst role and now get into my personal role, many people, and I include myself in that, will see a significant difference between Allied troops storming Normandy to defeat the Nazi Germany Aryans that were part of that nation at the time, and migrants crossing the Mediterranean, as the Secretary of Defense stated. That's a very different conversation from the one D-Day is meant to commemorate.
General, can I ask you about the meddling it appears Hegseth has done in military promotions and the impact that that must have for him to hire a former January 6er, welcome them into the Pentagon, but then to block the promotions of women, of people of color? What message that may be sending to people in the military who want to build careers there, who may have imagined themselves being promoted at some point in their own careers, and I have to imagine must be questioning now whether they ever will be able to build the kinds of careers they want to in an environment like that.
Yeah, Antonio, many of them are, because I've talked to quite a few of them. And here's what I'd say going through the whole issue. I actually wrote an article for Bulwark on this subject because I had the opportunity on 9 different occasions to sit on promotion boards. 3 of those promotion boards were for general officers, and I know how they work. They are the most fair thing you can imagine. This is not a bunch of old guys with gray hair getting together and picking the people they want. Records from these individuals are screened and evaluated. There are usually over 1,000 people going for that 1-star promotion, of which about 30 every year are named in the Army. I'm not sure the numbers in the Navy and the Air Force, but by the way, those numbers are given by congressional decree. Those are not something the services make up. There is a process. I sat in a one-star board for 2 weeks looking over 1,000 files after hearing from the Secretary of the Army what we should be looking for. So if Secretary Hegseth has some issues with who's being selected or he wants certain qualifications, he should give those to the Secretary of the Services and they should put them in the board procedures. You can do that. The Secretary of Defense can certainly pull people off of a list for a variety of reasons. But the problem that we've seen in the last couple of weeks is he refuses to name the reasons why these individuals have been pulled. There are rumors abounding in the military right now. Are these because people were part of DEI programs or worked for certain people that Secretary Hegseth or President Trump didn't like? Or was it just something that he had to scrub from some of his minions to try and figure out who is not going to abide by the rules and do some of the things that he doesn't want them to do? It becomes a cultural issue, and it's plain politics as opposed to the true meritocracy, which the secretary continues to talk about but not do. And it is really having a chill on the entire armed forces. Even the younger officers saying, should I stay in this organization when I don't know if I work hard and make a career out of this and get to the point where I might be promoted because of my potential and my performance, somebody can just yank me off of a list without telling me why? That's the challenge that you're seeing right now within the military of people trying to figure out exactly what the heck is going on. I'd say one more thing, too. Congress has a say in all this. Congress is the approving authority. So I think we've seen some movement of both the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee to question Secretary Hegseth as to why he's doing these things. There were some questions during recent testimony, but he refused to say why, using the excuse of, hey, I'm not going to talk about this in an open forum. That's fine, but if you have a reason to pull somebody from a list of the senior rank strategic leadership of the Army, you should really provide a reason. No organization or company in America does something like that without repercussions. We shouldn't allow it to happen in the Department of Defense either.
Yeah, General, we're almost out of time, so I apologize. But I did want to ask you about this story that came out today from both NBC News and the New York Times. Slightly different, but it had to deal with the Pentagon raising concerns about the threat level of Israel spying on the United States. I'm not sure if you've seen that report, to its highest level. The Pentagon is increasingly concerned about Israel ramping up its spying on the U.S., recently raising the counterintelligence threat level from America's top ally in the Middle East to the highest level, according to 2 U.S. officials and 1 former U.S. official. The New York Times added, saying it was also concerned that spyware may be put on the officers, American officers or American soldiers in the region to eavesdrop on these negotiations. How concerned are you about that? What does that tell you from a close American ally?
Yeah, what I'd say is 2 things, Eamon, and it's a great question. You know, nations try and gather intelligence against each other, not only enemies, but friends. Israel has always looked to gain intelligence about what the United States is doing behind closed doors. We share secrets with each other that we don't share with other nations, to include Israel. So they would certainly want to know what's going on. The challenges we're seeing now, and by the way, before I leave that subject, when I used to travel to Israel as a soldier, which I did a lot, you know, I would leave computers and any kind of, at the time, BlackBerries back home because you always felt like they were going to try and get some classified information or even just some patterns of life from signals intelligence from you. So it is a common occurrence, but I'm concerned that it's probably increasing. And the reason why is because sometimes even our allies don't really understand what we're doing because of decisions made by the administrations. So they are trying to get an insider's track on this. You know, I don't doubt the reports are true. I just don't know how deep they go and what kind of intelligence they're attempting to collect.
Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thanks so much for your time tonight.